This is a 1996 Porsche 911 Turbo, and in fact, it's my 1996 Porsche 911 Turbo. When I was a kid reading car magazines, I would see this, and I would think to myself, why would anyone pay that much money for a stupid Porsche that looks like every other stupid Porsche when you could have a Ferrari or a Lamborghini or a Lotus Esprit or a Viper instead? Well, today, I've done just that, and I'm going to take you through my decision and show you all of the quirks and features of my new car. I've been using DeleteMe for years now, and let me tell you, I'm still just as grateful for it today as I was the day I signed up. The first time I saw my personal info all over the internet, it was honestly kind of alarming. My full name, old phone number, old addresses, even info about my family, it was just sitting there publicly accessible. And it wasn't on just one site, it was on dozens. I had no idea that kind of data was floating around, let alone how easy it was for anyone to get their hands on it. And listen, as someone who's pretty visible online, I've had to deal with some pretty weird stuff. Random emails, weird messages, people digging a little too deep. That's why privacy is something I take seriously. DeleteMe became a core part of how I protect myself and my family, and that's why I always recommend DeleteMe. It's been one of the best decisions I've made when it comes to online safety and peace of mind. DeleteMe is a subscription service that removes your personal information from hundreds of data broker sites. And here's what I love. You don't have to do anything complicated. You give them your info once, what you want removed, and they go to work. Every few months, they send me a personalized report showing exactly what they found and what they've removed. I've gotten emails like, we found your name, phone number, and address on 38 sites, and we removed it. It's honestly kind of incredible, and they don't stop. This is an ongoing thing. DeleteMe keeps monitoring and removing your info so it doesn't just come right back. Over the years, I've watched the amount of my data online shrink more and more. It's like a digital spring cleaning, but someone else is doing all the work. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for DeleteMe, now with a special discount for our viewers. Today, get 20% off your DeleteMe plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/demuro and use code DEMURO at checkout. The only way to get 20% off is to go to joindeleteme.com/demuro and enter code DEMURO at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/demuro, code DEMURO. All right, time for the quirks and features of the 993 Turbo. But first, I'm going to give you a little background on what this car is and why it's special, and also why I wanted one, why I chose this one specifically, and what I plan to do with it. Going to start with a little of my quirks and features first. But let's begin with the car, the 993 Turbo. 993 is the model code. This is a 911 Turbo, but to distinguish this generation, Porsche called it the 993, and enthusiasts have adopted that as well. Now, the 993 was the very last air-cooled Porsche 911, which is a big deal in the old-school vintage Porsche community. The cars were initially air-cooled, sort of the old way of cooling, and then they switched to water-cooled later, and that delineation sort of separates the vintage Porsche people from the modern Porsche people. Personally, I couldn't care less about that, honestly. I think an air-cooled car and a water-cooled car drive pretty much the same, and I think that stuff is silly. But it does provide an important demarcation line between sort of the old school original 911, which came out in the 60s, and the more modern cars. This, the last air-cooled 911, was sort of the last 911 designed around the original engineering and chassis and ethos of that original 911 from the 60s. They carried sort of the basic underpinnings of that design all the way into the 1990s before they finally gave the car a full redesign and switched to water cooling for the 996. So a lot of people think that this was sort of the last old school 911 in terms of construction, but also feel. Now, I actually don't agree with that. I think from a feel perspective, the 996, the next generation model, is the last old school 911. The last one that still felt little and tight and zippy before the cars got a little more luxurious, a little larger, a little more GT GT car. But the Porsche purists hate the 996 because of its headlights, and they will never admit that it has a similar zippy, tight feeling to this car, and so a lot of people think this is sort of the end of the line for the original 911. And indeed, this is a very analog car, but the cool thing is, it's also a modern car in terms of performance. Twin turbo, flat six, 0 to 60 magazines in this era were getting under 4 seconds. 3.9 to 4.1 seconds, 0 to 60 in a car from this era was a massive deal. By comparison, the Ferrari F355, a competitor here, was doing 0 to 60 in about 4.7 seconds at the same time, with over 400 horsepower and all-wheel drive and about 3,300 pound curb weight. This has modern car performance, but sort of an old car analog feel, which is why the 993 specifically is so beloved among older Porsche models. Now, I want to give you a little background on my history with this car. I remember reading car magazines as a kid and not understanding why anyone would ever want to buy one of these cars. I remember looking at the pricing numbers for the 911 Turbo and wondering if it was a misprint, a mistake, because why would anyone spend that much money? You could have a Ferrari or a Lamborghini instead of a Porsche that looks like all the other Porsches. It truly didn't make sense. I remember as a kid looking at a press photo of an arena red 993 Turbo in a magazine and actually sitting there thinking, why would anyone pay this? It's not a Ferrari. It just looks like a boring old Porsche. Who would do that? And then I drove one. The very first time I ever drove a Porsche 911 was the summer of 2008. I was 20 years old and I got a job as the lot porter at Ferrari of Denver. And we had two Porsche 911s in our used car section, a 996 C4S and a 993 C4S. And I was incredibly skeptical of these cars, as I had been my whole life, until I finally had the chance to get in them, to take them to the gas station or emissions test or whatever, and instantly I understood why people love these cars so much. Now, amazingly, they were the same price at the time. The 996 was just a used car. The 993 was pretty old. This love of the air-cooled vintage stuff hadn't come yet. And honestly, I liked them both about the same, which has remained true all these years later. I'm a huge advocate for the 996 911, and I also love the 993. But I've owned a 996 Turbo before, and I have always wanted to own the 993 Turbo, and I have wanted one ever since that fateful summer. And particularly, I wanted a turbo, the fastest, most exciting version I could get, and I wanted this color. This is called Arena Red, and I'm not a really big Porsche color guy, but this color and car were featured in the most famous Porsche print ad of all time, the Kills Bugs Fast ad, which to this day basically everybody associates with this car. Not just the 993 Turbo in this color, but basically every 993. The Kills Bugs Fast ad car. And I always buy my cars in the press color, and so I wanted that car in that color from the famous Kills Bugs Fast ad that I remember in magazines and posters from when I was a kid. And in fact, I've gotten close over the years. In 2011, I almost bought a 993 Turbo that was advertised being owned previously by Morgan Freeman. And I passed on it because I discovered it wasn't the correct Morgan Freeman, when really I shouldn't have paid attention to that and just bought the damn car, especially because it was $85,000 back then, very different from today's pricing. But at the same time, I also wanted a lot of cars, and over the last few years, I've gotten more into exotics. And even though I always had the 993 Turbo in the back of my mind, about 7 years ago, I bought my Ford GT, and then 3 years ago, my Carrera GT, and then the Countach, and I was kind of headed down the path of exotics rather than the 993 Turbo. And after getting those three special but needy cars and having 2 children, I have 2 kids under 5, felt like my hands were full, I had a lot going on, and I kind of swore off buying new cars. And I've been announcing on my podcast, my channel, and everywhere else that I was done with new cars, wasn't going to be buying anything else. And I've stuck to that for 2.5 years, which is a long time for someone who's kind of always around cars, always wants cars, buying cars, driving cars. 2.5 years without actually getting another new car. But the 993 Turbo has always kind of stuck with me. And if you've been watching my podcast, you'll know that over the last couple of months, I've started to kind of break down from my no new cars rule, specifically for an Arena Red 993 Turbo. That's what I wanted. And I've been saying no new cars unless this happens. But as much as I wanted one of these, I also made the decision that I wasn't going to buy one unless it was incredibly easy. I did not want to fly across the country, import one from Canada, buy a modified one that I had to spend hours chasing down parts. I wanted an easy transaction of a stock, that was important to me, USA market Arena Red 993 Turbo. And if it wasn't easy and if it wasn't stock, I wasn't going to do it. Thankfully, the transaction for this car was the single easiest vehicle purchase I have ever done in my entire life. Possibly the easiest you could ever do. Here's what happened. The dealer listed the car for sale about noon on a Friday. Actually, they never even listed it. The VIN had populated in their back-end software system, and so it was starting to appear in other software systems. And it just so happened that at the very same time, one of our Cars and Bids employees was running a VIN check on a different 993 that had been submitted to Cars and Bids, trying to get an accurate reserve price for the auction. And that car, this one, came up as a comparable vehicle that was for sale. And so he sent it to me. He said, hey, there's an Arena Red 993 Turbo. It's not listed, but it's here. I've got the VIN. It's at this dealer. You should call them. I called them at noon on the Friday. By 1 p.m. that same day, 1 hour later, I had already bought the car. I had already given them my deposit, given them my driver's license, added it to my insurance, and the next day I went up to the Porsche dealer in LA, Porsche Santa Clarita. I went up with a friend. We went up early in the morning, and by 2 p.m., the car was sitting in my garage less than 24 hours after I discovered its existence. That was pretty simple. So what made me want this particular car? A lot of stuff. For one, it is a USA market Arena Red 993 Turbo. The Euro cars had some changes, a different look. I didn't really like all that much. I specifically wanted a US car with, yes, the high ride height of the US cars. 993 people are going to be astonished anybody actually prefers this, but I do, and that's what I wanted, and that's what this car had. Unmodified, this car is almost completely stock, which was really important to me. I also kind of wanted a black interior that was also offered with beige or gray. Didn't like those as much. This was the one to have. Also important, this car is incredibly well documented. This car's had only 2 owners before me for 30 years, both here in Southern California. In fact, I looked through all the records and I can't see that this car has ever left Southern California. I mentioned the records because this is the single best documented car I have ever come across in my entire life. Every single service record going back to the original oil changes in 1996 and 97 are here. The window sticker, every emissions test, every registration renewal is included with this car. Binders full of records. I have never seen anything like it. Truly an incredibly well-documented car showing everything in its entire history. So there were no surprises. There was no guesswork. Has it been in an accident? Who's owned it before? I know all of that stuff, every part of this car's history. And amazingly, right before the previous owner got rid of the car, he spent about $20,000 on cosmetic upgrades. He repainted the brake calipers, repainted a lot of the front end stuff from years of rock chips since this car came out in the days before PPF. He then did a full paint correction and then did a full paint protection over the entire car, so it's cosmetically about as perfect as you're ever gonna get. Despite that, this car has about 60,000 miles on it, and that's what I wanted. I never buy low mile cars. I'm always looking for something I can drive and use without guilt of adding miles to a low mile car and destroying the value. So, a couple other things. First is, Am I a Porsche guy? I kind of joke in my podcast about how some people call me a Porsche guy, and I don't think I fit that stereotype, but it's a little harder to say that when I now own two Porsches, this and the Carrera GT. I'll tell you the reason I generally don't consider myself a Porsche guy is because when I think of Porsche guys, it's the people who obsess over every little option code and stitching and color and perfect correctness of the details, and that just isn't me. I was asked by a friend of mine when I got this car, hey, what options does it have? Does it have this, that? I don't know. I had to look at the window sticker, and even then I forgot them all. I don't care. It's not important to me. I don't get into the difference between the sport seats and the bucket seats and this and that. I care about driving a car, the driving experience, and this car has a great driving experience, as I'll explain later when I get behind the wheel, and it just so happens that it's a Porsche. It was the next car on my list that I wanted, and there are a lot of other cars on my list, including only one other Porsche. I just decided to get this one next. Now, you might also be wondering, how's it been? How have I liked it so far? Well, actually, I bought this car about 2 months ago, and I kind of delayed revealing it because I wanted to give Nick and Kenan some space to announce their new cars, Nick's SLR, Kenan's SL65, and so now here I am announcing this one. I've driven this car already about 2,000 miles in the 2 months that I've had it. I've been using it nonstop and kind of parking the other cars, and I've especially enjoyed using it, surprisingly enough, in traffic. I hate manual transmissions in traffic, but this one, the transmission is so good, I actually enjoy coming to a stop and start because I love working the clutch and shifter so much in this car. It's just so excellent. And helping to further put aside the notion that I am a Porsche guy purist, one of the very first things I did when I bought this car was I figured out how to install child seats in the back, and that involved cutting open the factory leather on the rear shelf in order to get access to the child seat tether. There's a very interesting thing about this car. By 1996, some countries had mandated child seat tethers for the back seats, but not a lot of countries. So Porsche installed them in this car, but if you were in a country that didn't mandate the tethers, they put leather covering up the tether latch points so you couldn't use them. And interestingly, Canada mandated the tethers, but the US did not. So US cars were covered up with the leather. And so I cut open the leather and discovered there they are, the child seat tether points, and I instantly installed a car seat. Now, don't be too afraid cutting up the leather in a 993. Oh, it's not so bad. For one thing, again, there were some markets where this was the factory setup. The leather was open here, and it was plugged by a little plastic panel that you'd put over there unless you were using the child seats. And indeed, I bought the correct little plastic panels to use when the child seats aren't in use, so the purists can still enjoy the car kind of as it was meant. More importantly, within a few weeks of owning this car, I was able to give my 4-year-old son his very first ride in a sports car. And he hasn't been into cars. And, Daddy's cars don't make a lot of sense to a little kid until he has the chance to actually get in the back and experience what it's like. And since then, he's been obsessed with this car, and he insists that I pick him up from school in fast car. And yesterday, he told his little friend when I picked him up, my daddy's picking me up today in a fast car, and it's a really fast car. And being able to share that experience with my son is far more important than the Porsche purists and the stupid leather. No matter how much money I lose because I cut open the leather, I don't care. And more importantly, it probably self-selects me away from having to deal with those people when I eventually sell the car. Because having the experience with my son and my other son who's about to age into being able to face forward and be in the other seat, that's been a really big deal for me. But anyway, that's the whole background. The car, why I like it, why I chose this one. Let's move on to the quirks and features. Starting on the outside with the body. These cars, the turbos, had a wider body, a wider rear end than the regular 993 models. And it's amazing how obvious that is when you stand on the side of the car. The track, the wheels aren't even lined up. The rear ones are so much further out, which is so crazy to see. And it really gives this car a distinctive and very cool look, that wide wide-body rear end. I also love the look of the rear spoiler, which is surprisingly curvy and almost sort of hand-shaped as opposed to the straight, vertical, horizontal spoiler upright situation you see on so many other cars. It's a cool look. And in general, I love the look of this car. I like the older 911s, but I especially like this one because it really flies under the radar. In 2 months and 2,000 miles owning this car, nobody cares. Nobody points or pays attention or freaks out when they see you. And when you get a Countach and other stuff, it's kind of nice to sometimes be able to have a fun car experience, but fly under the radar. It's amazing just how much more subtle and non-noticeable this car is compared with modern 911 and especially 911 turbo models. But anyway, beyond the style, a couple of interesting little quirks on the outside. One of them is definitely the rear wiper, which isn't exactly the most attractive or graceful thing just kind of stuck on the back of the car. It's a little ungainly, but most 993 turbo models had them because this car had all-wheel drive and it was fast, and the thinking was you would use it for rainy day, high-speed Autobahn drives. You needed that rear wiper so you could see, and so they tacked it on there just like that, unfortunately. Interestingly, the front wipers are also rather bizarre. You can see there are 2 of them, but they are right next to each other, and the wipe action is kind of strange. It creates a rather odd pattern. I had this car in heavy rain for like 2 hours the other day. I'm using the wipers and thinking, these are weird. This is a weird thing, but I will say it does work pretty perfectly to wipe the windshield. This size and sort of width is exactly covered by these 2 wipers. Another interesting quirk is the wheels, which have hollow spokes. Now here's something strange. Basically every 993 Turbo had this wheel design. Some came with hollow spokes and some didn't. And I don't think there was really an option. I think it was sort of random. This car thankfully has the hollow spokes. And I say thankfully because it saved weight. The hollow spoke wheels saved about 5 pounds per wheel compared to the regular filled in solid spoke wheels. And that's a pretty decent amount of weight when you think at the corners, at the wheels to save. It makes this car just a little bit faster in case I ever encounter a solid spoke 993 Turbo on the road. Another interesting quirk is the key, which is just plain strange. The key doesn't look all that unusual, but you flip it over and there's a button. That is not a lock-unlock button. There's a separate fob for that. Instead, that button turns on a little light that's mounted near the key part, and that light is actually pretty bright and shockingly useful. When I'm in a dark parking garage or it's at nighttime, get in the car, you push that light when you're trying to stick the key in the ignition, and it makes it a lot easier to see exactly where the ignition is, so you insert the key correctly and you don't scratch up this area. It's actually a pretty brilliant idea. In the days of keys, it would have made sense for a lot more keys to have this feature, and it was a hallmark on Porsche keys from this era. And speaking of keys and the doors, this car has one of the all-time greatest door opening latch sounds. Take a listen to some opens and closes. It's so perfectly mechanical. And when you open the door over on the driver's side, it leads you to a rather interesting quirk. Specifically, to the left of the steering wheel, you have this unmarked sort of lever pull tab thing. That is to open up the fuel door. You pull it and the fuel door on the front fender pops open and reveals another interesting quirk, which is that inside the fuel door, there's this little vinyl piece that can be rolled out in order to protect the fender, the paint, the bodywork, from fuel getting on it during your fuel stop, which is another pretty cool idea. You're filling up the car, you roll out your vinyl protector piece, and you don't drip any fuel on the car itself. And next we move inside the 993, where there are quite a few interesting quirks, but probably the most obvious and notable is just how small this interior is. It's amazing how little and compact and tight it feels in this car compared compared to a brand new 911, which isn't really that many generations removed from this one. And indeed, the numbers are crazy. A new 911 Turbo is about a foot longer than this car, the 993, and it's about 6 inches wider than the 993, and those are pretty considerable numbers in the world of sports cars. It's grown quite a bit. In fact, the 993 is actually shorter in length than a modern Cayman, which is really the thing that I like the most about this car, just how little and tossable it is. Something I also love about the Cayman, it's the smaller one, the more tossable, throw it around, and that's exactly how this car feels, owing in part to its small size, which becomes really apparent when you climb inside and see just how small it is in here. But anyway, on to the other interesting quirks. The door panel, I really love the storage compartment. You take a look, there is no obvious storage compartment, but this isn't just an armrest, it's a lid that lifts up and you can put stuff in it and then close it up again and it becomes an armrest again. Pretty smart. There is also a latch here, and you can see it is wonderfully integrated into the door panel. It doesn't really look like an ugly door latch. Instead, it just looks like trim, except it's functional, which is kind of cool. Less cool is the positioning of the power window switches. You can see 2 of them, but instead of next to each other for the left and right windows, they are forward and back, which means you got to kind of figure out which is which. Of course, over time, you start to understand, but it's definitely an odd positioning. Now, we move next into the center control stack, where you can see a few buttons here in the middle next to the gear lever. They're all pretty straightforward, but one of them has an exclamation point on it. What happens when you press the exclamation point button? Does the car get a lot more excited? No, actually, what happens is that button will cancel whatever warning message you've received. So what happens is you turn on the car and there's like a warning light, and it shows the warning light and a little light with an exclamation point. If you press that button, you're basically acknowledging that you know and understand, and you don't need the exclamation point talking to you and telling you about the warning light, because you're already aware of it and you're going to take care of it. That's the odd purpose of that odd button. And speaking of warning lights, I think it's kind of cool that a lot of the warning lights for this car are integrated into the clock over on the right. You can see the clock right now. It looks like a normal clock, nothing unusual there, but when you turn the car to accessories and all the warning lights come on, you can see they're sort of in between all of the clock numbers, which is a pretty cool idea. So you don't see the warning lights or the outlines of the warning lights unless they're actually on, and then they sort of show up in that kind of unexpected place. Another thing I love about this gauge cluster, right in the center you have the tachometer, which is a Porsche hallmark, because the engine speed matters most on the racetrack, not the actual vehicle speed. But of course, to most people, it's the vehicle speed that matters the most, because you're driving on public roads. And so they solved for that by putting a digital speed readout display kind of at the lower middle of the tachometer screen. And that's pretty cool, because it means you can still have the Porsche tradition of the center tachometer, but you can also get a digital speed readout, which is also important in that same spot. And speaking of digital readouts and technology in this car, one of the first things I did when I bought this car, in addition to getting the child seats in, I replaced the stereo with this. Porsche makes a modern head unit for their old school cars that has, believe it or not, Apple CarPlay in this incredibly tiny little screen. It gives you your Apple CarPlay display like you would have in a normal car in a much larger screen. Of course, a larger screen won't fit into the dashboard design of this car, so that's what you're stuck with. Amazingly, it actually works pretty well. It's not huge. Sometimes you got to really squint to see. Changing the track, the music, you're really touching a small component of the screen, but it's better than not having Apple CarPlay, I suppose, and it's nice to have this stereo with that feature. It's kind of cool. And it looks like it fits in with the car. The lighting color is the same, and the buttons, and it looks like it was designed at the same time. It's a neat thing to see. Now, directly next to the stereo, you have the climate controls, which have one odd function. Over on the left, you have 2 buttons with snowflakes on them, a small snowflake and a large snowflake. The small snowflake turns on the air conditioning, and from there you can twist this dial to adjust the fan speed. The large snowflake turns on the air conditioning full blast. And so if you don't want to turn on the small snowflake and twist the dial, you just press the large snowflake and you automatically get full blast without having to go through that cumbersome process of pressing a button and twisting a dial. How difficult. And next we move on to the back seats in the 993 Turbo. You fold the front seat forward with this little latch here. You push it forward, interior in the back, which you can see insanely small. This car with its tiny interior, smaller footprint than a modern Cayman, but with back seats, they're not really useful for anything except little kids. And thankfully, I have little kids who are happy to ride back here. The other thing you can use the back seats for, though, you can fold down the rear seat back and you get a carpeted area here that you can use for storage. So you can put stuff on this seat back. I always love the fact that it actually says turbo when you fold the seats down. Just a reminder, even if you're in cargo storage mode, that you've got the cool one. And speaking of storage, of course, up front, you have a front trunk, a hallmark of 911 models. Nothing particularly interesting going on in this front trunk, nothing special or quirky or weird, but that's your front trunk situation in this car. Obviously, that's where the real storage happens. And in back, of course, you have the engine. Like I said, twin turbo, flat six, just over 400 horsepower, 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds. You can't see much in the engine compartment, as you're probably realizing right now, but I assure you it's back there and it's wonderful. And to prove that, next I'm going to get behind the wheel of my new 993 Turbo and I'm going to tell you what I love so much about the driving experience of this car. All right, driving the 993 Turbo, my 993 Turbo. I got to say, I was very intentional in the purchase of this car. You know, I've been announcing on the podcast for weeks now that I wanted one of these. And I've been getting a lot of feedback about that. Oh, you should consider this. You should consider that. You get something faster, get something more raw, get something with more energy. I got all those kings covered. I got a bunch of other cars that have a lot of that stuff. What I really wanted from this car was something that was a little bit more under the radar, was a little bit more practical, but still very fast and very connected. And that's exactly what the 993 Turbo delivers. It really provides, like it's modern car fast. You know, the magazines were getting 0 to 60 in 3.9 seconds when this car was new, which is unbelievable. It's barely slower than my Carrera GT. And yet it's old school analog. You're sitting close. I can reach over and touch the passenger side door, which you can't in a modern 911 without bending way over. And it's so tossable and little, and the steering is so just tight and immediately communicative. And that's what I wanted from this car. And obviously a huge benefit as well is that I got back seats, so now my children can ride in it with me, which is really their first experience in a sports car. I just love it. It does exactly what I wanted it to do, which is it's totally under the radar. It is an enormous amount of fun. It's not over the top fun like the Ford GT and the Carrera GT, but it also doesn't come with everything that those cars come with, which is a rough ride, a tight interior, hard to get in and out of. You're worried about it when you're parked. None of that stuff really factors into this car. Nobody ever notices this car on the street. At 1,300 miles, I have not had a single random person give me a thumbs up or a wave or a photo, you know, nothing like that. And also it's just an easy car to use. There's no ground clearance issues. I haven't had any reliability problems. It's a pretty solidly built car. It's an easy, simple car to go fast in. And so I've already driven this car up to LA 5 times, which is about 120 miles one way, depending on where you go. And that kind of is a testament to what I think this car is perfect for. So let's talk about speed. 0 to 60 in 3.9 seconds. And it feels every bit that fast. And the really cool thing about this car, unlike other 90s, this era kind of turbo cars I've driven, there is not turbo lag. This car does not suffer from that issue. It was a massive problem in the Audi RS2 that I had, and in a lot of other cars I've driven for my channel. But this car, that is not the situation at all. Next thing, beyond just the acceleration, which really is impressive in all situations, like I said, shifter clutch is amazing. Some people don't like the bottom hinged pedals, but I'm used to them from the Carrera GT, and I just think this car is one of the very best shifter clutches in the entire world. I think that the 80s 911s, they had started to kind of realize, like, hey, this is a big part of the driving experience and we should focus on this, and they sort of refined it throughout the end of the 80s into the 964 911, and then finally with the 993 they delivered like a really awesome shifter clutch feel which also was carried into the 996 and the 997 and even the modern cars. But today it's a little bit more notchy. It's a little bit less feel-based and a little bit more like you just kind of slam it into gear and it's sort of, that's what you hear. Like there's a lot of red matching involved. There's a little bit more nuance and finesse to it, which is kind of fun. What I like about this is just how tossable and little and throw around this car is. And it much more reminds me of a modern day Cayman than a modern day 911. Obviously you still have the engine in the back, you have back seats like a 911, but from a driving perspective, it's tight and it's tossable and it's incredibly quick to respond, much more like I feel the mid-engine cars are than the larger, touring car 911. Now, in terms of handling this car, it's a 90s car and I'm sticking with the factory suspension because I really think the increased ride height benefits the design of the car. I think it looks better taller, which no one agrees with, but I have my reasons. And so the result of that is that the ride is pretty soft, it's pretty comfortable, but it's not exactly incredibly focused and, fast around the corners, etc. And it is very capable around corners and it is impressive and it can do that work, but it's not an unbelievable, Canyon Carver corner car. I've driven, this platform is capable of it. I've driven a 993 Carrera RS that did feel that way. And I think that with the right suspension setup, I probably could get that in this car, but then I start getting into some of the uncomfortability and the harsh ride, which I have in my other cars, which I specifically didn't want in this one. I think personally, and this is gonna be hilarious because I just bought this car, I think it's way overpriced. I do not believe this car delivers a $250,000 driving experience. I also don't even think it's a $250,000 rarity experience. I think Porsche prices have gone crazy. But in my world, I'm lucky enough to not really pay attention to purchase price, but rather total cost of ownership. So I only think about what I can buy the car for and what I can sell the car for. And to me, this car's market is clearly defined and it certainly won't be going down in value. But I sit in this car and I think, man, Nick bought his SLR for only $25,000 more. For the same money as this car, I could have had a Murcielago. This does not deliver that level of thrills at all. Especially when you consider that a 996 turbo, the next 911, it's faster, and I think the driving experience is just as good, if not better in a lot of ways. You lose some of the analog, but you gain some speed and a little bit more precision, and that car is $60,000. I think this car is way overpriced, but I think the market is pretty clear on what it's going to be. I don't think it's going to suddenly drop in value. Overall, though, I just really love this car. I really think this car delivers exactly what I wanted, which is sort of I can still, even when I'm going on longer drives, longer trips, I can still drive a sports car and a cool sports car and one that I really love and really delivers this awesome analog, almost vintage type experience, which is so neat to be able to do that in a sports car. After I've kind of eschewed sports cars for trips like that for so long, I think it's really neat to have that experience. So I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to be in this car and I'm thrilled to use it. I suspect I will not own it forever. I suspect it'll just be a few-year whirlwind romance till I'm on to the next one. But I'm happy. I'm really happy with this car, and I'm glad that I started talking on the pod about how I wanted one and ended up finding this one specifically because it's really perfect for me. And so that's the 993 Turbo, my 993 Turbo. I have wanted one of these ever since that fateful day in the summer of 2008 when I drove a 993 for the very first time, and I am thrilled that I finally got one, even if that means that you think I'm a Porsche guy. Anyway, now it's time to give my 993 Turbo a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 55 out of 100, which puts my 993 Turbo here, right in the middle of this group with a pretty nice balance of weekend and daily scores. I previously reviewed a 993 Carrera RS, which earned a higher weekend score, but it was so compromised for daily driving, the 993 Turbo wins overall. The 993 Turbo also easily beats out cars like the Ferrari F355, Lotus Esprit, and Acura NSX in daily use categories, thanks to all-wheel drive, good visibility, and 4 seats, but those cars score higher in the weekend categories that reward pomp and circumstance. The 993 Turbo isn't a pomp and circumstance car. That's why I like it.